Hey, I'm Courtney Brooke, and this is Hustle for Happiness podcast. We are all on this journey to find happiness, and let's face it, it takes work. And honestly, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This podcast is dedicated to helping you navigate life and cut through the noise. As a certified life coach, recovering perfectionist, and survivor of the foster care system, I'm all about keeping things real. With my unique outlook on life that is truly infectious, we cover everything from achieving happiness and optimal self-care to stories of those sharing their wisdom and expertise. Thank you for showing up for yourself. Now, let's get started. All right, so we are live. Here we go. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Brandon. It's such an honor. I've been following you for, I feel like 5 years, but I know you.
It's been a long time. Yeah, it's mutual.
It's like through social media, and that's the power of, I think, social media is connecting, being together, but then meeting like-minded people. Those of you just tuning in for the first time or don't even know who Brandon is, Brandon, will you tell people a little bit about yourself? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as far as, I'll just give my little intro spiel, but, just a small town Utah country boy that couldn't wait to see the big city, got out. And really, honestly, once I did and I got out and saw the big world, it was like, I think the little town might be good, especially after having kids and stuff. So my background, I actually come from a medical background. I was in medical for a long time. We kind of morphed that into where Quincy and I, obviously my wife, worked together and have worked with tens of thousands of clients, helping transform bodies and minds and spirits, I guess, over the last, I guess it's been about 8 years. So that's it in a nutshell. But I have to say I'm conflicted being here because I'm so excited to have a conversation, and the conflict comes in that it's only 45 minutes.
I know. I that's hard for me too, because especially when you connect, it's like we got to cut ourselves off. Totally. And that's hard because it changes the energy, but it's efficiency, but I love that.
Yes. And I think the conflict will just come back to like the value add. I mean, because I just want to ask you all the questions. I think that'll be one of the biggest struggles for me for the next 45 minutes.
And ask me away, because yesterday we had a really beautiful conversation about this podcast specifically, but then we, again, just kept talking and asking each other questions. And I think that is the beauty of why I'm doing this podcast, is not only just for the podcast, but to also connect with people, meeting them in person. If we've been friends like you and I on social media for a while, and bringing that actually into real life.
Yeah, it's exciting. And again, like you mentioned about social media, there's a lot of negative connotations about social media and the pressures of it, but the connections that are available, I think. So anyway, I appreciate you for that. And this is actually our first time meeting face to face, but it's like old friends.
I agree. I think it's so great. So let's go back to your early small town days.
Okay.
When you were a small town kid with big city aspirations, what were some of the dreams and ambitions during that time for you? Yeah,
it's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody at the gym today, and we'll get into talking at the gym, I'm sure, later. But I had this conversation about, he had some, inquiring about my upbringing, and it was very small town blue collar. And I was limited by what my surroundings were. And I thought that the best thing I could do was get the most high paying hourly job that I could get. And I realized in hindsight, that was very limiting in a lot of ways.
But I mean, I feel like I was that way. Like I'm still that. I mean, I identified with money up until I started doing my coaching business. I said that is how I proved myself was, money. So I resonate that. And I'm sure a lot of people resonate that. What's the next paying job, or why they want to leave a job is because they're not getting paid enough too.
Right. Totally. And I think that was the majority of my upbringing was just like, it was focused around stuff and the best job I could get within a small community to achieve that. And so it was an interesting limiting in hindsight,
How so?
And we were, the question at the gym from this gentleman came in about how we're raising our kids.
Okay.
And it was very much like that. Like, if you want something, you're gonna have to work hard to get it. And I still find that, but do we give our kids too much? And that's where the question came up. In contrast to how we grew up, where it was work hard and it was just go work an hourly job so that you can afford the things that you want. And how does that contrast with now? We give our kids a lot.
Right.
And is that to mask, kind of the things that we didn't have? And is it bad?
Right.
And so I think I'm still working through that. But the financial blueprint that I had versus what my kids have, I think they'll be fast forwarded 10 years from what I was.
I feel like, and going back to my child, I think James and I don't have kids. And so that is a constant conversation, not only between him and I, but in my own head too, is, I had a hardships, and it's like, well, kids are going to have their hardships regardless. Like I believe that we don't have to create hardships. Like they're already going to be there. But I think what I'm hearing is this piece of work ethic and working for something and not just giving and finding that balance. Is that what you and this guy were talking about?
That's exactly it. And again, it really just comes down to the limiting beliefs that I was presented because of my surroundings. And I think that's now where, having seen the world, having gotten out there, coming back to this small town and seeing the people that I grew up with that are still kind of in that mindset.
Yeah.
And not that there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but I think it should be a choice.
Yeah.
If you can have all of the information and then make the choice that fits you best.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of where it's narrowed down for me, is that this small town, kid that wanted to see the world and expected more out of himself and saw that, and then kind of took what I learned and took it back home. And now I'm raising my kids in the same community, which is kind of weird, thinking that I would never go back. But it is a neat experience now to raise my kids in the same place with a different and hopefully more open mindset, especially when it comes to their potential.
Yeah. And I think for me and people that do stay at home, for you specifically, moving away and then coming back, was your ego checked a little bit? Like, how did you work through that adjustment phase?
Yeah. The ego was definitely checked once I left home, right? Like that was the eye opener for me. It was, first of all, there is so much more potential. I mean, I was exposed to personal development after I left. I didn't even know that was a thing, like people working on themselves. and that, again, I'm taking that back to this like kind of narrow focus where it's just like, there's these outline steps that you take being a kid from a small community, and personal development isn't in it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good things. I'm not speaking bad about small towns or small town mentality. I generally...
Just your specific experience.
My experience.
Yep.
My experience with it. And that word self-development was really something that was like an eye-opener for me. There's people teaching you how to be better and to want more and to be able to do more. And then the steps to achieve that was a mind-blowing experience for me. And so my ego was checked just by the vastness of potential that we had as people.
And so like when you moved back home or moved away and then came back, like how did your viewpoint change? Like what if you versus you just staying there or staying out, like what changed for you to want to come back?
Yeah, great question. I think that I appreciated it. I think that my appreciation for where I had some disdain and kind of, even when I was leaving, that's where the ego was. It was where I'm too good to be here. And once I left, saw the world, and I had a great appreciation for simplicity.
And it's comfort. There's comfort in that.
Yes.
I mean, you pushed yourself to try it, and then you developed your own opinion. I think a lot of people don't do that. Like they don't even develop their opinion. It's just safe to be next to their family. It's just safe because the unknown. You conquered that and then developed that opinion. I think that's huge. And something to acknowledge.
Yeah, and I think for me now, just being able to pass that on.
Yeah,
that perspective, you know, and again, being at this point in our lives where our kids are kind of at that point where they're starting to make their own decisions.
Yeah,
it's instead of just telling them to teach them, has been with a perspective that I've gained. Now that again, they're still in the place that I grew up in. They're able and surrounded by those thoughts and ideas of limiting, what their capabilities are by some of the nature of where they live, and being able to share that with them is kind of a highlight reel for me. Being able to allow them to learn and grow as individuals without that limiting, like I just need to get an hourly rate job so that I can take care. It's
back to why you left. But that really drove your purpose in your younger years, and that's not something you want them to drive.
Exactly.
I think that my background being with my when I say my mom, my adoptive mom, is go make the money, earn your own money. Everything seemed to be about money, and that's how you progress. Or just put your head down and do the job that you might not like.
Right.
Just work hard.
What's the end game for that?
Right. And there's no fulfillment piece. And so I'm sure you're doing that with your kid. It sounds like you're doing that with your kids.
I'm doing the best that I can, but I do feel like they kind of have the best of both worlds right now.
Yeah.
Where I think, first of all, they're their appreciation for where we live, because they were also with us when we were in Vegas and a few other places that were, contrasting to where we're at now.
Yeah.
And they're also able to take a lot of that they've learned and take it back into that community. But also I rely on this word, this financial blueprint, where again, I think that's kind of a narrow focus on a broader topic, but they're not limited on what they feel like they could earn or what their capabilities are, because it's not just like you're going to stay here, get the next best job and just stick it out, because that's just what's available.
So how is it teaching that grit though? Because there is that part where you got to work your way up. I mean, we were talking about social media earlier, and we're talking about how views on YouTube are low because we're just starting vlogging. There's immediate gratification in that, right? So how do you instill that immediate gratification? That might equal hardship. You know what I'm saying? How do you instill that in your kids?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, is that we as parents want to protect, and I don't mean to make this all about parenting, but it really is something that's it's at the forefront of my attention and a lot of things that I do, because we are in that phase.
Right.
And hardships are one of the biggest learning tools that kids have. We had it. And it's just different. I think, speaking from our upbringing, our kids will have different hardships. And I don't know if we would have been equipped at 16 to handle the social media world, handle a lot of the things. But I have high expectations of my kids. Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is that their life is a little bit easier in a lot of ways compared to what we had. Yep. But my expectations of where my parents were just like, yeah, just get by, Right. There was no topic of grades. There was no expectations on, other than just getting your chores done. There was just no expectations of kind of higher frequency things.
So if we segue into the family thing, but also people who don't have kids, I'm hearing this word, and you're going to correct me on this, is balance, right? So you're teaching your kids balance at this age, but let's apply it to those that don't have kids. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but many people struggle to achieve work-life balance. And you've mentioned it being a snake oil. And I just have been thinking about this when we were talking yesterday. I didn't know what a snake oil was. So can you elaborate on why you see it that way and the approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So snake oil is one of those things. That term was actually presented to me about balance as a snake oil. And so I've kind of taken that because really, I'll just take it back.
But snake oil, as a placebo, you explain, I'm sorry, but I feel like snake oil, it's a term. It's not legit snake oil.
Correct. It's a term.
I thought it was. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a term used to basically it's a placebo. It's something that you could sell somebody to cure any ailment. And so we're sold this idea that we're just searching for overall balance in life.
Yep.
And I think if you imagine a teeter-totter where one side gives, the other one has to take. And in my mind, growing up, especially I'll take it back to my career in medicine, where I was on call all the time. We drove 2 cars everywhere we went. And ultimately, I sacrificed a lot of time with my family because of my career. And I was young and I was hyper-focused on that upward momentum of my career, that I would have admit at the time that I was sacrificing time. Mm. But in hindsight, again, I'll speak in hindsight, because I realized I was being a better dad in those moments because I was on such limited time with them. And so every moment, every second I had with them was so important. So I didn't feel, I don't feel now looking back that I had to give time with my family to be better at my job.
Yeah, if you visually see it, it's a scale of up, down. And you mentioned this word, harmony.
Harmony.
That's so interesting, because now I'm thinking in my back of my head, is this work-life balance a buzzword? Is it marketing? How do you feel about that term, knowing that, you said it's a snake's oil, so I'm just curious where you stand on that.
Yeah, I think it's something that we're being sold. We're being sold this idea of just you've got to balance work-life, you've got to have this balance, and that's the only term. And I think a lot of people, if we break it down for them, would agree with what we're saying here, is that you can't take, say your fitness, say your health, say your hobbies, your family, your spouse, your relationships, your friends, and your career. You can't balance all that, right?
Right.
That's impossible to have balance in all of that. So it should work harmoniously together. It should all work synergistically to better you and to better the people around you. Because if you're looking for balance, something's going to give.
Right. And I also what came to mind is people go to the gym or go to coffee meetings and they're still not there. I'm like, at least for me, like I'm like fast-paced environment, constantly rushing around. Am I being intentional? Is that really being effective with my time? Is that I don't know if that's balancing, but it's this harmony piece that, like you mentioned yesterday, that you could have only 1 hour, or right now 1 hour with your kid, but how are you using that? It could have been wasted. Like you weren't there, but if you maximize that hour, that's harmony and everything else.
Right. Then you're fulfilled as a dad, as a parent, and the child themselves feels the one thing that they want from you is connection and love.
Right.
And so I think that 1 hour spent in a high frequency communication and touch is much better than all the hours. If you're balancing out everything to be equal, right? Which is what balance is, then it doesn't necessarily equate to that fulfillment that child or we as parents should have.
And I feel like there are so many, so let's call it work-life harmony from here on out, but there are so many definitions of work-life harmony. How do you define it for yourself in business and personally, or is it all one?
It's all one. It is.
And what does that mean? Like, if we're not using work-life balance, work-life harmony, how do you see and how do you really apply it?
Yeah, well, I think you use the term being fulfilled, using fulfillment. And I think ultimately, if you're looking at what we're here to fill is fulfillment. I mean, if we take it in our discussion yesterday, not to digress on the topic, but we could be hyper successful in one category, whether that's our work, whether that's our family, our relationship, but something's going to suffer. But if we're fulfilled in all of those categories, that's ultimately what we're chasing, right? Is fulfillment.
Yeah.
And so if you're giving away something in this balance, or even if we're talking harmoniously trying to live this work-life relationship, if we're giving up something, we're not fulfilled in that category.
Right.
And how does that equate into the other one? You don't go to work every day feeling like I am on it, but I know at home something's painful. Right. And so you have to bring fulfillment into the home, which is what we're talking about, the life side of this balance or this harmony, is you have to be fulfilled in knowing that every aspect you're touching during the day is 100% of what you've got for that section, right? So work, I'm giving 100% while I'm there. If it's 8 hours, if it's 4 hours, if it's 2 hours, I'm focused, and as I leave here, I'm fulfilled in that category. Yeah. Knowing that I'm moving on to the next category, whether that's the soccer game with the kids or the date night with the spouse or friends, that again, you're leaving that being fulfilled. So I think it's easy to try to find everything being equal, but it just can't be.
So this work-life balance is seen as your key to happiness, as I'm hearing. Is like, or not work-life balance. Your work-life harmony is seen for your key to happiness. So what advice would you give to start listeners who may feel pressured to achieve that balance, but are unsure where to even start?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll just kind of dive in and share the story of kind of this awakening phase that came to me, and it was based around, and you're well aware of the situation with my wife Quincy, where it was mid 2022 where she was having these blank seizures. Okay, and I'll make this story short, but she was having these blank seizures, and it was kind of this thing where it was like, are you just feeling underfed? Are you working out too much or too hard? And she ended up having a really bad episode where she ended up in the emergency room where they actually found out she had a brain tumor. Okay, she's 40 years old, healthy. I mean, her speaking of work-life balance, she's Miss Health and Fitness, and she's very, very much on that focus of wellness and longevity. And come to find out, she was diagnosed with a 4-centimeter brain tumor just behind her right eye. And so life got real quick, And so the things, as we look at all the things that we have to do during our day, we focus a lot on thin things, and that made everything very, very important and very, very real to the point where we started asking myself, I'll speak for myself because I can't speak for her, but what is really important? And that kind of narrowed down this, and we'll use the term work-life balance, is there was just some important things, and there was a lot of things that weren't important. So it's really easy to get real and to get serious about things when most things actually don't matter.
Right, and I hear that, like, the clarity just came through hard for you, and the values really like stood out to what's important.
Yeah.
And you searched that news. I mean, you and Quincy are amazing, and that Quincy's story is in your story, because I'm like, I can't imagine like being in your shoes, seeing your partner, but then I'm like thinking, what if that happens to James, or what happens, like you don't know. Some people, you need that blessing to really see clearer. Now, I don't wish brain tumors upon everyone to see clarity in their life. How can people find clarity without such a traumatic or...
Yeah, they don't have to. And I think that's one of those things that you have to self-reflect on. And it really is, and you mentioned the word intentionality, where if you don't live your life with intention, then it really, you're just moving through reacting to things that come. And so to answer your question, how do you realize that? Is that I hope, and that's my experience. That's what it took for me.
Yeah.
That's what it took for me, is to see there was actually 6 days from the moment that she went into the emergency room and they found the brain tumor until we met with the neurosurgeon. So the information we had leaving that emergency room is that you have a 4-centimeter brain tumor, and that was it. And so is it cancerous? Right. How much time does she have to live?
Right, you go down this rabbit hole. Yeah. How did you, I mean, not to take a tangent on Quincy's story, but let's bring you into this because you're her partner, is how did you stop that rabbit hole? How did you really stay grounded for yourself, being the provider of Quincy and your family and everyone? How did you manage yourself?
Yeah, it was, I think once the shock, once you realize what can happen, is that Tony Robbins speaks of the six human needs.
Okay.
And certainty is one of them. And in that time frame, there was absolutely no certainty.
Right.
So
a lot of unknown.
What are we going to do? What does this look like? How much time do we have? Is it something that we're going to have to prepare for months out? Is this something that's going to, we didn't know anything other than just, it could be life-threatening. Yeah. And that was just the most unnerving part of it. I mean, Quincy would cry where she would say, I just want to see my grandkids. And I just couldn't imagine, we have a really good connection and have for nearly 20 years. And so imagining her not being here was something that I had to face, And so embracing the uncertainty of, I don't have control. And I'm a very control-minded person. I like to control variables. I like to control my environment. And so to realize that, like, hey, there are certain things that we just cannot control, and I have to be okay with it.
And my favorite term is radical acceptance. And it's in the Bible, accept the things we cannot change and the wisdom to know the difference. But that first part is accepting the things we cannot change. And that's really what radical acceptance is. It's just, ultimately, this is out of my control. There are people out there that are going through their darkest days right now too, or you've passed yours and you've done it, and you can say, like, your perspective has changed you for that. There's people that are probably listening, looking for that. Well, what can I do to control my thoughts? How can I practice self-care while maybe your partner's dying, or the business might be failing, or you're going through a breakup? I mean, big T, little t, as they would say. Mm-hmm. How did you manage yourself? What did you do for yourself in those times?
Yeah, I think it has to be, you have to look at it through the glass of what have we done to prepare ourselves for this.
Right.
I think the comfort in knowing that we had such a good relationship, there was nothing that needed to be done. I think taking care of our relationship for all these years was one of the biggest things that was like a comfort. The second thing is, and we talked a lot about this, in fact, Quincy mentioned this, and I'll just share this with you, is that we were driving home during this 6-day period that we didn't know anything other than that she had a brain tumor. She looked over at me and she said, you know what? This is what I've been training for. And I think that's special because she's a very fit person, and people would always ask her, what are you training for? Like, are you an endurance athlete? Do you do physique shows? She didn't have an answer. And she never had an answer. And it was just like this awareness of hers of like, this is what I've been training for. And I think there's an element of forcing ourselves to do hard things that allows us to prepare for the things that we don't know are coming.
Right.
And if you're mentally strong, physically strong, and spiritually strong, that when those trials and those tests come, you know what pain feels like.
Right.
You know what suffering feels like.
Yeah.
Pain is something that you can't really do much about. Suffering is one thing that mentally you can take control over.
Right, because everyone suffers. It's just how you manage it.
Totally.
And that's so simply said. I mean, you went through an extreme. But there's suffering everywhere. It's really how we view it. And I really hear that you didn't let that take you on.
Yeah. And that was, I think it is oversimplified in saying that, but it was something that once you're put in that situation, it becomes very clear very quickly of just like that uncertainty.
Right.
I can either lay in bed and let this possibly the last few days,
living
weeks, months.
Presently in that moment, knowing that tomorrow is not guaranteed or even the next second.
Totally.
And do you still apply that same kind of knowledge to today?
It's strange how it's still there.
Yeah.
You know, I'll just share. We're actually going through some litigation right now.
Yeah.
And we're on the defendant side of this, and so it's very reactive to the situation. And more, I realize like that we've been doing this for a year and a half now. And the further we get into this, the more relaxed I am with it. It's because I am just like, I am comfortable with uncertainty.
Right.
I know that I will do whatever's within my power to manage what I can. But most of it's just mentally being able to say, hey, look, I'm okay with the outcome. And that's the funny thing, not funny, I'll rephrase that. That's the most interesting thing for me is that you have the mental fortitude to say, okay, I know that I'm okay with whatever's to come. And I was okay with, and this is hard to say, I was okay knowing that it's a possibility that I would lose Quincy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't have another choice. I'm not an optimistic person. I'm just a realist.
Right.
And that was where I came.
That's how
I'm just like, hey, the reality is that this is a possibility.
Right.
And I have to figure out how to be okay with that.
Right. And I think that a lot of us want to fight what we can't control. We want to fight. We want to do everything in our power to just force the outcome that is desirable, but the expectation of maybe we just eradicate the expectations. Maybe we come back to that present moment and we surrender, accept that the future is actually really not in our control, no matter how hard we pull everything down with us, like go down with our business, go down with that failed relationship, go down with not being okay with cancer, rather than that holding on, releasing that energy, like I will be okay. But that I love that perspective of being a realist about life. I think that's super key. I think people complicate things with their thoughts and their outcomes and the expectations and what they really want. How did you not let your expectation or the outcome dictate your thoughts?
I think it did. I think it did for a period of time. And, you know, and again, just like you mentioned, I mean, being a realist, I mean, there's certain things that we can control. There's certain things that are just scientific and there's a cause and effect to a lot of things, but our emotion isn't one of those, you know? Our emotion's not one of those things. Like if there was a person, we've worked with tens of thousands of weight loss clients, and I can get a person to lose weight if I can just give them, 2 + 2 = 4 every time. Yeah. And there's no way around that. And there's certain things like building a business. There's certain things that are just scientific. If you do X, most of the time it'll
it's
follow
pretty
suit.
Calculated. And that's the realist thing, that you know that's calculated.
Correct. Emotion isn't one of those.
No.
Right? And that's the other side of what we do is that like I can't get somebody emotionally to be where I want them to be. There's no formula to manage emotions. And so during those times and during those struggles and phases that I had to figure it out, it was just, again, taking a step back and being okay with how things turn out. And again, I think if I can, and this will be the question I'll have for you, is where does that threshold come in with what I can control and be a realist versus what I want to force?
Right. I mean, the force, I think, is what's that motivation behind it? What are you hoping for? I mean, it's like living in the future, right? If you're living in that future, then you're forcing and you have that expectation. But then that emotion, I think, is that regulation piece.
Yeah.
That goes deep down. I mean, subconsciously, we react to things. Totally. Childhood, experiences, situations, that all includes emotions, though. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is what we can't control, but I think using that as momentum to really understand yourself even more, right? When we understand ourselves more, we're understanding our emotions, we're getting in tune with ourselves. And that leads me to that vulnerability.
Totally.
And that's scary with a partner. At least for me, I've been this lone wolf mentality until I met James, working with your partner through hardships. Mm-hmm. And showing that you're scared. I mean, did you have to put on that front? I mean, I know James sometimes feels like he has to because he's a provider, but it's like vulnerability is what brings you closer. I mean, this was a hard moment, and people go through hardships with their partners, and it's easy to pull back and pull away and look outwardly and not bring in closer. But I think vulnerability is so huge to be able to have Quincy see you in that light, to see Quincy in that light. That must have been ultimately beautiful to be there for each other.
Yeah. Vulnerability was a tough thing for me.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned with James, where we have to fill these certain roles. And I think our personalities and our background obviously yields kind of how we present ourselves in the present. But being the man and knowing that she was hypersensitive and being vulnerable, that there had to be kind of the yin to the yang on that. And
Absolutely.
so I was that guy. I was that one that was like, I can be there, I can do this, I can shoulder it. And I don't express my vulnerabilities to her.
Scary.
Yeah. And I have to say it phased through, and I feel like there was a time where I did open up and was vulnerable.
Yeah.
And but I appreciate that. Are you able to do that with James or vice versa? I mean,
it's hard. I definitely have to push myself because, he worries and we worry about each other. I mean, you get it. It's an energy exchange, totally. And it's me being so aware of what am I doing right now? Oh my gosh, I'm doing an old pattern, which is pulling back, appearing strong, falling into this role. And really I have needs too, right?
Yeah.
I know you're stressed or you're sick or you're busy, but I need to be heard. And I think that voice saying that, because James can't read my mind.
Totally.
If I don't tell him, how is he going to know where I stand? And I encourage that for other people, is use that voice, that tool to communicate rather than retract and pull back. But it's easier said than done. But when I'm aware of that, I'm like, what am I doing? I call myself out. I'm like, he is my partner too. Our partners might be going through pain, or you have a friend that's doing worse and you're afraid to tell them your story. But it's that vulnerability humanifies us.
Totally.
Did I say it right?
Yeah.
And it allows us to connect even more. I think the vulnerability piece is I'm working on it every day. It's in my nature to just pull back. I mean, I wasn't shown unconditional love. I had to take care of myself from I was in a home from 9 to 18, but I didn't have a family till 9. And then I was out of the house at 18. So I really lived in a family for 9 years. So for me, I have to go back and understand myself and be like, what am I doing? And, we're married for a year now. I'm being tested in marriage because I've never had to work with somebody. So for me, when I'm pulling back, I'm like, this is an old pattern.
Right.
That vulnerability piece, though, is really, I'm working on it. I'm using I statements. I'm saying I am reactive because I'm scared of what's going to happen. It's sharing that piece.
Do you share that with James, or would you say I statements? Is that something you do personally?
I do I statements. I statements. I don't say, you are acting kind of weird today. What's going on? It's, wait, I'm acting weird. I'm feeling anxious around you. Can we talk?
Yeah.
It's not calling your friend and venting, saying, oh my gosh, James is doing X, Y, and Z, or Quincy, or whatever your kids. It's, hey, if you notice a pattern and behavior shift, there's something probably going on. And it's rather than turning away, it's, hey, how can I be here for you? And I think that piece is really important, not turning away oh my God, they're acting weird, but it's, hey, I think that vulnerability piece, bringing people into your feelings, bringing them into your head, so hard.
Do you pre-plan that? Do you say, okay, James, if I feel like this in the future, this is how we're going to manage? Or do you do it more in the moment? I mean, I guess, does he have the expectation of okay, when you act like this is, or when you feel like this is a better term, when you feel like this is what I would like for you to do and come to me? Or do you know
time and place? I feel like when he gets off a series of calls, for instance, I'm like, my feelings are really hurt. Time and place. I will literally think it out. I have to do my own self-management piece, though. I can't take it out on him.
Right.
I want to understand my feelings. So I'll journal, I'll go for a walk, I'll get a workout in, because a lot of it is reacting based on the right away emotion that you're freaking out, scared, overwhelming. You hear a song and it reminds you, whatever it might be, something triggers you.
Yeah.
Well, but I give myself that gap in between because I just know myself. I see red sometimes. I'm like, fuck this. And so I'm like, that's not his problem though. Yeah. So I try to differentiate, is this me or is this a him thing? Because not all of it is him. I'm here feeling his energy and I'm like, how am I internalizing this?
Totally.
But when I don't have the situation where Quincy and brain tumor and things like that, where you have this role as the man of the house, a father, and your wife as your partner, that must have been really hard to put your boxing gloves down or put your guard down. Did you ever share with her how you felt, or was that hard for you as well? I mean, that vulnerability piece is...
Yeah, the vulnerability piece was tough, and it's always tough. I'm very closed off.
Same.
It's
easier.
I would rather not try to work through my feelings vocally with somebody, especially if it's the offender, if I can say that, which it's typically like it falls on me and my emotions, how I respond. But I'm just very closed off. I'd rather try to take some time and fill it out myself. That's honestly one thing that I'm probably trying to work through.
Yeah.
Just personally and in communicating with family or, Quincy, or where it's just, I just do better. Just give me some time. I'll get over it.
Right.
But during that phase, during that time, it was definitely something that after the fact, I felt like I was able to open up, but definitely not during.
Yeah. And I feel that it's almost easier just to preserve your energy, keep going.
Yeah.
I think that there's that easy piece though. That's your role though.
Yeah.
There is that beautiful piece of saying, I'm going to share because I want to get closer. I want to break that pattern of putting it all on myself.
Right.
But people do that. What did you do during those times? How did you manage those? Maybe it's overwhelm, or what did you do for yourself? What were some self-care activities or that self-management piece? How did you do that?
Yeah, interestingly enough,
any hobbies you got into?
The horse thing. I mean, if you follow it all with what I do.
He's a rancher all of a sudden.
I very much jumped into this horse world, this equine. I guess they have a lot of equine therapy, and maybe that's what it was. But I felt so much comfort, and I guess even looking back, it's still something that just brings me so much joy. And I think during that time where it was a heightened state of emotion for me, that was the release of just the calm in the storm.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge thing to point out too, is that it's you mentioned some of the things that you do during your times where you're peaked or you're having these high emotional states, whether that's something that you and James are dealing with, whether that's something that you deal with personally, your business, or, clientele, whatever it may be, just taking the time, having that self-awareness. And I think that I love that you brought it back to that, is that it's on you.
Yeah.
It really is. Mm-hmm. Everything, it may be something that somebody's doing to you, but how you handle it, how you manage it, and how you control it is entirely 100% up to you. And I think that that's why you're in a perfect position to do what you do, is because you have that self-awareness.
Thank you.
And I think that that's the key. Honestly, I think it's the key for happiness. If you can be aware of yourself, because again, emotion isn't science. It's not something that we can put a formula to, but being able to understand it, especially within ourselves, and the beautiful thing like you do is help other people understand it, is something that I think is what leads people to finding that ultimate fulfillment.
And I think we are so easy to place blame or cancel culture or, have an opinion. And if we're not all thinking the same thing, it's you're not valued or you're seen as the bad guy. And I'm this, it's totally off topic, but it is that piece of, it's not about what everyone else is saying. Come back to you. Why are you triggered? And then really dissect it, really get down to you. Because and back to the vulnerability piece too, is James isn't asking me to keep it all in. James isn't asking me to take on the role to hold it all together. And I'm sure Quincy isn't asking that of you, but how are you putting that pressure on you to maintain that?
Totally. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think overall, if we're talking, we need to have some foresight in that, right? And if being vulnerable right now is what will lead to what we want in a year from now or 5 years from now, especially if we're talking relationships, vulnerability is going to be a key and an integral part of that. And I guess I'll just go back to say, for us, we just have to pre-plan what that looks like. What's the best way for me to communicate with you when I'm in this phase, and how can I be vulnerable in that and have you accept that?
Right. Because
I don't want to be scorned or turned down if I go and open up and then it's not received.
You have to feel safe. And I think that piece of having that gap in between sharing and really articulating and deep diving into what are you trying to say, not getting emotional, not reacting, but really coming down to that loving that inner child. Mine is that 9-year-old scared girl. And it's that's the part of me that probably isn't sharing because I feel like I just need to hide or put on a show or just prove myself that I am strong enough. But no one's asking me of that. So when we break it down and really understand the motivations of why we aren't sharing, that's on us again. But then I feel like this piece of, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something that's been on my mind, and creating that. You have to create your own safe space because no one's going to do it for you.
Right. I wonder as you're speaking, if there's, obviously you pick your battles. You'd mentioned that. You can't take everything to him. And James doesn't require you to not bring anything to him.
Right.
And so what is it that, and how do you do that? I mean, how do you self-regulate and know that because I take it back to this kind of big picture that we're talking about. We make thick and thin things. right? And my awakening was kind of like, hey, look, I understand that I was probably hyper-focused on a bunch of stuff that didn't matter. And I could let that go once I had this perspective.
Right.
You know, have you been able to obviously self-regulate? And then how do you pick and choose what your biggest concerns are that you're going to make the biggest emphasis on, and those that you can just like, okay, I can shoulder this and just let it go?
I think it comes down to, do we have like the needs, our basic needs, right? Our health, we have a roof over our head. I think picking and choosing, telling him a story about sitting in traffic, what's that going to do, right? But I think prioritizing what's important. Like, I don't share every single thing, but that picking the battles or your thick and thins or whatever, I think being intentional again. You know, being intentional, not just with how you wake up in the morning, but how you're coming to your partner and presenting yourself really thought out, being intentional, not just reactionary. I think people react so fast without even thinking and just listening to everyone else's opinion. But I think that's silly. I think being intentional with how you come to your partner. You know, if it's important to me, it's important to him. You know, if it's important to him, then I'm going to have importance to me. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to like carry on with that, but I feel like, I don't know.
Do you think most people live with intention?
No.
I would agree.
That's why I'm like an intentionality coach, I feel like, because that's literally what I teach on, is like there's no intentionality. They're scrolling mindlessly. They're just shopping because someone else has the things that they want, and they're doing the job because it pays the bills. Like we're listening to our parents. I don't think our parents' generation was taught intentionality. Mm-hmm. I think that just put your head down and do it. But like when you have intentionality, you have fulfillment, you have desire, it's again, work-life harmony. You know, you have that harmonious life that is, everything is in sync.
Yeah.
And it's all because of you and your choice.
I think more and more people are let's say miserable. I think there's a lot of times people are miserable in their current state, but they dabble in the most important things, right? Because they don't live with intentionality. Yeah. So I don't feel successful. Okay, well, what are you doing? Are you dabbling in your career? Are you dabbling in your business? I mean, most businesses aren't successful because people are dabbling in them, right? Relationships are one of those things I think people dabble in. Yeah. Do you do the work? Do you live with intention?
And when it gets hard.
Do you plan out and know what you're going to do when things get hard? Do you have an agreement how arguments are going to go? Most people dabble in a relationship, but it's one of the biggest things that causes them the most pain, you know?
And they know what they need to do.
They know.
I mean, they don't though. It's like, I mean, you're a coach with fitness, and you literally tell them what they need to do, but they don't. And there's that emotional piece, but people don't do it because they know, but they don't want to do the work. They don't want to push through a hard time in a relationship, a hard time in a career, which is back to what you're trying to teach your kids, is you don't have to have hardship, but you work through the hard. Like, I don't know if that's the same or difference, but it's instilling that. Because people don't want to do that. They think everything is easy, and I blame social media because it's like, everyone drops, I made six figures. Like, that is I hate it.
Yeah, it is. And it is. And that comparison thing, obviously very, very strong. But again, what is that person that's on the receiving end of that feels like they're not quite living up? What are they doing? They're dabbling in life. They're dabbling in things. Yeah. And like you say, scrolling mindlessly. And so I love that intentionality is the word that you chose to explain how you manage, especially your relationship and your business, and the fact that you're sharing that with other people. Because I think it is the key to just ultimately moving forward and feeling that progress in life, which is another need. We need to feel like we're moving forward. And if you don't do it with intention, then how do you do it? You don't.
There's none. And purpose. Like, I think the comparison thing, it's just so important, I feel like, for people to, that piece of just believing in themselves too. I think that doubt comes in, creeps in. I mean, there's so much things on anxiety, all these labels out there, anxiety, depression, ADHD, all these things. People put themselves in boxes, and that's why they can't do certain things. Yeah. My husband suffers from high stress, like impairment. That's okay. But create tools for yourself to get out of it. Totally. Have that hit list. You know, whether it's calling somebody, writing a prayer, reading the Bible, going for a walk, create your hit list when you're in those moments. But I feel like you got to do the work to set yourself up, because no one's going to do it for you. Be the advocate of your own happiness. Like, advocate for that and work for it. And it might be tough at first. You're going to realize a lot of good things and shitty things about yourself, but advocate for it, fight for it, because no one's really going to do it for you.
No one. No. And at the end of the day, it's if you're willing to take on that as that responsibility.
Yeah.
That, hey, I am in charge of how this turns out.
And in control. You are in control.
You are in control. You are in control. And it's not easy. I think that's an oversimplification. And I think there's times that we go through phases, where we have to work through things.
Yeah.
It's not just like, okay, I made the decision and I flipped the switch.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, it's a process.
Absolutely.
And just being aware though, and being intentional, like you say, having a plan to get out of it is the key, instead of just being reactive to it.
Or staying where you are and being stuck. I'm so tired of like people justifying why they are not to where they need to be or want to be. Oh, I can't because I'm a single mom.
Yep.
I'm sorry you chose to have your kid most of the time. But I'm saying, like, don't let that stop you. Break, like we're talking about limiting beliefs earlier. Question those limiting beliefs. Question things. Question everyone. And really is like you did. You left town, developed your opinion that you don't want to leave town. You came back. Like, develop your opinions for you and not on other people. I think that's part of life, is creating those experiences for yourself and not because someone told you.
Absolutely. I think what we were mentioning before, there are certain things that are just basically cause and effect. Scientific approach to weight loss, to making money, not even making money, but being comfortable financially, right? That's a formula. We could write that formula for anybody. If you have more money left over at the end of the month, then you're in a pretty good position. That's not a stressful position if you're having all of your needs met. What we run into is that it is the part of it that you're talking about is it doesn't matter. All these formulas that you could put in for these things, it doesn't matter what color you are, what age you are, what, where you come from, what your background is. If you're willing to implement certain things, you'll get there. Yeah. But the other side that we have to bring in is managing the emotional side. Yep. How do we develop the fortitude mentally to get through those times and to get from where we're at now to where we want to be?
So what are some things you do?
Yeah,
I mean, you talk about these tools. What are some tools that it might make sense to you and not to anybody else, but really helps you stay clear? I mean, you have kids to manage. You have personalities to manage. You have clients. Your wife had brain tumor. Like, how did you keep persevering? Because life happens to every one of us, right? How do you keep persevering that?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I'm a simple-minded person and I'm very black and white. For me, if I take care of I take care of the variables that I can control, which is silly as it is. No, I felt, and I'll be vulnerable here, is that I got in a dark space. It's first of the year, right? So, and I just started looking at the things that were out of control, but what I could control. Yep. And this thing I went to, this sounds cheesy to some people, but it's what I know and what I could immediately control. Am I tracking my food? That's what I do. And so
but you're fueling the jet. I mean, we could go down a food tangent, but you're fueling the jet. That's how you think that's going to keep you going.
Totally. But I wasn't doing it.
Okay.
So why? I don't know.
You check
obviously.
Yourself.
Okay. So let's start there. That's the one thing I can control. I'm huge on one thing you can control. Yep. If you're not doing the one thing I can do, Jordan Peterson talks about cleaning your room. Yep. Right? If you can't clean your room, I mean, like, then you expect your life to be in order? Like, no. Do the most simple thing, the things that you do every day. So I went to tracking my food. I know if I can eat right and I can eat healthy, and that's the one thing that I started with.
Right. And that's how you get more control, is when you start, like, it's kind of like a laundry list. Like, you do the things you can, you're going to feel good. That propels you more for working on those other things.
Yeah, very rarely can you do it all, right?
You can't.
I can't leave this office right now and go do everything.
Again,
I can do
harmony.
one thing though, right? Like, I can start with the one thing that I can control, and then once I have that under wraps, I'll move to the next one. And so for me, to answer your question in a broad scale, is I just start managing one thing I can control at a time. And before I noticed, it was very quickly, but I started feeling more and more control of myself, my emotions, my reaction to things, and I started feeling more in line and fulfilled in what I was supposed to be doing, because I let other things take control. And so go back to the basics, go back to the things that you do know that you have, the one thing that you can do right now. And maybe that is changing the light bulbs that have been out for 6 months. And you're like, I'm going to get to that.
And it's crazy because I think people try to overcomplicate things. Absolutely. And that's why they never even start.
Yep.
Go simple and don't try to do 5 things. Like, that's beautifully said, is work on what you can control, not what other people are doing. Everyone's talking about their morning routines. If that doesn't work for you, like, it's silly. Mm-hmm. I love that. Do one thing and just focus on that consistently.
Right. Yeah. And that's, in some business coaching that I do, everybody wants to start this business. They're looking at step 25.
Yeah.
And they're overwhelmed and I can't get this going. It's like, well, what's the one thing that you should do right now? Have you done that? No. Well, let's start there.
Yep.
And then we'll worry about step 2. Yep. But you want to worry about step 25 right now, you are going to be overwhelmed. And I think
you won't succeed. You're setting yourself up for failure. So I think a key takeaway as people are listening to this is start smaller than you even think.
Yep.
And do it
today.
Consistently. Today. Yes.
Start now.
And we start today. That's like how I end a lot of my coaching calls is we start today, not yesterday. We start right now.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time today.
Yes.
I appreciate you opening up about your relationship, your family, your kids, and vulnerability is huge.
Totally. Happy to do it.
How can people find you, Brandon?
Yeah, so I'm an Instagram guy. I did hear you say you're a calendar girl. And so
I am a calendar girl.
I feel bad because I'm like the least organized guy. So I wish I had like all of my profiles.
You don't have to be.
So anyway, Instagram, my last name's Whimpey. Did we even talk about that?
Brandon Whimpey.
I've been outrunning my last name for nearly 40 years. It's Whimpey. So B as in boy, Whimpey is my Instagram.
Embrace it.
Yep, that's the best place.
Follow Brandon. He's amazing. He's inspiring, and he is amazingly opinionated. And I love that about you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope today's episode left you better than when I found you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and tune in every Monday to kickstart your week and set your weekly intentions with me. You can find me and HFH on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, or online at heycourtneybrook.com. I firmly believe in the power of sharing. If you know someone else who would benefit from this podcast, please share it with them. And remember, when you work on you, I get to be there.